In Yin Sotai, we're asking that question, right? What's the least amount effort I could ask the patient to give me? And all I have to do is meet. To resist a very light effort, I don't have to come in heavy-handed. So I'm learning something all the while myself when I do Yin Sotai with a patient.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological. Learning to practice medicine is hard. It's hard because it takes time, and there is no way around the seasoning and understandings that seemingly spontaneously show up one day after years of attentive puzzling. It's a curious thing, learning to practice medicine. Our teachers tell us something, or they show us something, but we rarely understand it in the moment. We will copy them and do what they do, and often enough, it is helpful. But the thing that will season you as a practitioner is seeing for yourself how things work. In that moment, when you really see it, when it unfolds for you and you get it, in that instant, the learning truly becomes yours. Something transformative happens. You can skillfully focus your attention once you know how something works. You see clearly through your experience. You no longer need to lean on theory. You're working directly with the reality of nature. So, for example, once you're able to see the expression of and how blood stasis is held in place by your patient with emotional trauma, you no longer need your teacher's voice in your ear saying, emotional trauma creates blood stasis. This is a subtle shift from believing to knowing. And as you see for yourself how the medicine can work, you'll begin to see connections to which you were previously blind. You no longer need the stepping stones. Now you can see the path. You could say with medicine, we learn it ourselves, but we don't learn it by ourselves. We have plenty of help. But there comes a moment when you go from working through the construct of an idea to something more organic and unfolding. It comes in bits and pieces over time. It requires both patience and attention. But it does come in time, and when it does, there is both a sense of loss and gain at the same moment as you retire the ideas of your teachers and join them in a more embodied way of puzzling through the medicine. These conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. Blue Poppy, your new one-stop shop, has speedy shipping options on everything that you need for your clinic. It's Women's Health Month at Mayway Herbs. Check out their new website for learning resources on helping women with herbal medicine. Are you a creature of habit? How about making a change that helps your patients and the planet with AccuFast needles? And later in the show, raising your fees doesn't have to be a difficult process. Jane has helpful suggestions on making it easy and effective. And finally, have you considered that having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things that you can do? Julie Bear Don't Walk has, and she can help you do something about it too. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Geological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast. Picture this. Your clinic is buzzing with patients, and then you realize that you're down to your last box of needles. No need for panic, because Blue Poppy, your one-stop shop for all your acupuncture needs, they ship orders received before 3 p.m. on the same day. With a quick visit to Blue Poppy's website, you can order premium needles, herbal formulas, and that special Dr. Bob's oil that your patients love. Blue Poppy understands practitioners can't keep patients waiting. That's why they strive to get you what you need when you need it. From high-quality Chinese herbs and formulations to acupuncture supplies and clinical essentials, Blue Poppy has served practitioners for nearly 40 years with products that meet the highest of standards. Discover everything Blue Poppy has to offer by visiting www.bluepoppy.com, and don't forget to subscribe to their mailing list for exclusive offers and more.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lau, president of Mayway Herbs. May is Women's Health Month, and as a women-owned and women-run business, we especially love how Chinese medicine can support wellness through every stage of a woman's life. So in this month's newsletter and podcast, we're covering topics like PMS, pregnancy, menopause, and osteoporosis. We'll share expert insights and effective treatment strategies you can put to good use in your clinic. Our Plumflower brand line includes herbal tea pills, tablets, extract granules, and organic herbs, all of which you can find on Mayway.com, and where you can also find articles, videos, and other resources to support your practice. Since 1969, Mayway has been a trusted source for high-quality herbal products. In these challenging times, please know that we remain committed to keeping our products accessible and affordable so you can take care of yourself and your patients. As always, thank you for supporting Real Chinese Medicine.
Daily habits and routines feel comforting, familiar, easy, automatic. That's the power of repetition. You've worked out the kinks and can do it with your eyes closed. But what if you shook things up? What if you ditched the old routine and tried something new? Hi, I'm John Stan. I've practiced acupuncture for over 30 years, and together with my wife Kelly, we created the world's first eco-friendly acupuncture needle. The AcuFast earth-friendly needle system cuts your packaging waste by 60 to 90%, depending upon your needle type, speeds up your needling, gives you more control, and best of all, while you're healing patients, we plant a tree for every 2 boxes your clinic uses. Thousands of acupuncturists have already made the switch. In just the last year, they've helped plant over 16,000 trees. Since we started, that number has grown to over 50,000. So break the routine. Be the change. Visit AcuFastNeedles.com. Your patients and the planet will thank you.
The character for listen in Chinese, ting, it's made up of the characters for eyes, ears, and heart. It does not include the character for hand, but if you've practiced for any length of time, you'll know the importance of listening to what our hands tell us. Bob Quinn, who has previously joined us on Qiological, you can check out episode number 46, which was on the investigation of dreams in East Asian medicine. Bob suggested that we do a series of conversations on bodywork, which I thought was a terrific idea. And I've got him with us today to kick off this series on bodywork and East Asian medicine. Over the next month or so, we'll be bringing you perspectives on medicine that rely less on the use of needles and more on the use of hands. I really appreciate Bob reaching out with this idea and joining me today for this conversation on Yin Sotai. Let's get into it. Bob Quinn, welcome back to Qiological.
Thanks, Michael. It's good to be back.
It's good to have you here. So you sent me an email not too long ago, I thought was a fantastic suggestion, which was, how about doing a month of just delving into bodywork on Qiological?
Yeah.
And I love it when something comes across my attention and I just go, yes, that's right. And why didn't I think of that a while ago?
Right. Well, you've covered some of the ground already. I know you had Alice wielding on with her Seiki, right? Developed by Kishi Akinobu. And you probably have had others as well.
I've had some others, yes. Winter Jade. And
didn't see her on your list. I'll listen to that.
Yeah, there's a number of them, but I loved the idea. Let's just take a month. Let's just really take a dive. And so you're up first, man. You kicked off the idea. So I'm happy to have you here for this. So there's all kinds of different body work,
right,
in our particular profession. And it seems to me so often those of us that use needles tend to preference the needles over our hands.
Right.
I mean, you're a little bit different. You come from the Japanese traditions, and those tend to be a bit more hands-on. There certainly are hands-on traditions within East Asian medicine, but like really, really using those hands, using the body as a whole. It seems to me, when I think about my early education, it's something that you learn on the way to getting to use a needle. And so I'm really interested in taking a dive here with you on what if we just stick with our hands?
It probably was the oldest healing modality. It was just simple touch. By the way, we were mentioning Alice. She's come up with kind of a Seiki touch manifesto. I'll send you that because I was much influenced by studying with her in Europe and hope to study further with her. I do practice some Seiki here with my patients. But this touch manifesto might be something you want to add as a resource to your interview with her, to send an update to your listeners. That's a little bit outside of what we're talking about with Yin Sotai in my path with bodywork. But 1983, I was living in Atlanta. I bought a bodywork table, and my girlfriend at the time, her best friend was a massage therapist, a fairly newly minted one, and she was eager to share techniques with us. And my girlfriend, she eventually became a massage therapist herself. We would just practice. So that was a long time before I started to study Chinese medicine formally, which was 1995. So already 12 years before, I was just in love with just touching bodies, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then just continued through the years, always wanting to give friends shoulder rubs and things like that. And I picked Occam as the place I would study because I really loved their Shiatsu teacher at the time, as Jim Cleaver. And when I had visited the school, I visited his class, and he used me as a model for the whole class. And I could see this guy's got world-class hands, and I want to study with him. And I was actually the last person to study with him at Occam because then he and Heiner Fruhoff went and started the program at NUNM. And I went over once I graduated, and I became his teaching assistant, not for Shiatsu, but for the acupuncture classes. He was teaching those also. And around that time that I started to study Shiatsu with him, maybe 6 months later, I started to study traditional Thai massage with Dr. Paul Greenbaum, who's he'd probably been practicing that in the U.S. longer than almost anyone, and still does. He's a chiropractor, acupuncturist, massage therapist. And I did about 120 hours with him, some classes repeated. I practiced. Thai massage kept me alive, just in a financial sense, for years because I don't think I was that good an acupuncturist, but I was a hell of a good massage therapist, Thai massage. I only did Thai massage.
Mm-hmm. I think about, I was talking with someone just the other day, a recent graduate, and they're like, how do you get started? I mean, how do you like keep yourself afloat until you're finally afloat? And, I know that a lot of people, they'll do part-time jobs. Sometimes if they have a bodywork background, they'll keep doing some of that. What I'm curious to know from you is how the Thai massage at that time not just kept you afloat, but maybe helped inform your acupuncture work so that you could understand better what you were doing with that.
Well, at that time, I was studying the Marxime acupuncture physical medicine style. I never really had a love for TCM right from day one, sad to say. And I'm not trying to say anything negative about it as a style, but just my personal response to it. I wanted something hands-on, patient-based. In those days, Marxime was coming to OCOM every year to teach continuing ed classes. Kiko was coming in too, by the way. And so I was working for 3 years while I was a student at the HIV clinic that Subhuti Dharmananda still runs. It's not exclusively dedicated to HIV patients any longer, but there's still this clinic called the Immune Enhancement Program or Project, IEP. And I worked there. It was called Moxa Slave, but I was paid, and I did 4 hours of Moxa nonstop, basically every Friday afternoon. One of the acupuncturists there, Eduardo, he was a student of Marxime. So I could not just have Mark's books, but I could see what it looked in action to, work in this idea of the three great circuits and the palpation, incorporating the extraordinary vessel treatment, local treatment, other meridian treatment. So I was thinking that way. And luckily at OCOM, my supervisor was the Tuina teacher. I got on his shift all the time. Only one exception, or actually two. So all my clinic shifts with a guy who loved putting hands on bodies, and he was interested in Mark's work. So he just turned me loose to do that. And so I never really had supervision to practice TCM, even though I have a doctoral degree in it. Sorry to admit that,
Yes.
but
Well, but you had an opportunity to really follow what had your attention.
it's for sure had my attention. I wanted to have help making sense of palpation based information. And, it's not a brutal style. We use a 38 gauge needle in that style. I don't practice it any longer, but I'm glad I went through that. And I still know the thinking. I think Mark Seen made a real contribution to Chinese medicine here. You could see his background in philosophy and the way he approached things. And so it was gentler than the needling I had learned in school by a little bit. And but then I started coming up to your neck of the woods at that time, Seattle, starting in January of '99. Slowly taking those classes in the certificate program. You might remember that it was based out of Niome at the time.
Yes, back when there was a Niome.
Yeah, Stephen Brown, Dan Zizza, Brenda Lowe, and Stephen Brown taught Sotai, which is our topic here. My expression of that I call Yin Sotai. But that's where I got my start. Was Stephen was my meridian therapy teacher. I had him for 8 days learning Shudo style meridian therapy. Then the ion pumping cords with various teachers there, including Brenda Lowe. And I redid the Sotai course 2 years later with Stephen, and that was a much smaller group. That's when I really started to click with it. And the ion pumping cord classes really were key for me because I practiced that Monica style for 10, 12 years in a kind of a fusion with the Shudo style meridian therapy. But I also had people coming to my practice who just wanted Thai massage. And I was spending a lot of time trying to develop my skills there. And luckily, my teacher was a local teacher, so I could spend more time with him. And now I'm much more yin therapy oriented guy these days. And Thai massage is not that. It's quite physical. It can be done, it doesn't have to be done brutally, but it's a direct form.
I've had a little Thai massage. It's kind of like someone's doing yoga on you along with some massage. It's
Exactly.
delightful.
Yeah. But it's what we call a direct method, and Sotai, including Yin Sotai, is an indirect. So what does that mean? That indirect method, we move away from constriction, pain, right? So if we're going to move the patient's shoulder, neck, any joint, knee, we're always going to move in the direction of ease. Sotai is as much a movement therapy as it is body work, right? There's no massaging that really goes on in a Sotai treatment, purely Sotai treatment. Whereas Thai massage is direct, right? If you can't stretch your hamstring, they stretch it for you, right? And they keep going into the range that's difficult to go into.
And they'll put their fingers on insertions and all kinds of things to help loosen it up even more.
Yeah, I still think very highly of Thai massage. It's just at this point in my life, I'm interested in the indirect method.
What happened for you with that? You were so involved with the Thai, and then this other thing comes, and it sounds like it's the exhale to an inhale. It's completely opposite.
I think the acupuncture led me there. I think the acupuncture was what led me into a gentler body work because eventually it start to get a little bit somewhere. I've had, I won't name them, but teachers of mine from that time when I was just learning the Japanese styles tell me, oh, by the way, back then you weren't any good at all, right? So it took a while to get somewhere.
It does take a while to get somewhere.
But then patients started to tell me, this works better than what you did before, right? Before meaning more yang style needling, say. So the patients were encouraging me to pursue this more yin style. And then I met in that second class with Stephen Brown. He mentioned that he had come in contact, just phone contact at that point, with Peter Thompson in Connecticut, kind of down near at the Rhode Island corner. And Peter had studied even before him, kind of generation 1.0. I think of myself and you as generation 2.5. But that original generation of pioneers, right? You had Dan Bensky, Ted Kapchuk. But in Japan, you had Dan Kenner and Peter Thompson studying first Westerners, and that they passed the national board exams. They still have practice rights, privileges in Japan, and came back here, right? So I think Peter graduated in 77 or 78. But what Stephen explained was odd about Peter is Sotai was his number one therapy. Acupuncture and then moxa, these were secondary and tertiary therapies for him. Well, at that time, I'd spent quite a bit of time reading in Hashimoto's book. I'd done classes with Stephen. I've been practicing it with the patients. I literally didn't even know how to conceive of that. What would that even look like? For me, Sotai at that point in time was at the most 10, but more typically 5 minutes at the end of an acupuncture treatment. Do a few movements to I was thinking of it, try to integrate fascially any muscular releases you had achieved in your acupuncture treatment. And put Sotai front and center as the main therapy. I didn't even, I thought, well, how would you even get started? And what would you do? And so that was in the back of my mind. At the time, I had started a company, People's Herbs, and we had just started to make money. And I just felt this drive because it takes a lot of time to get a company going. And that had been consuming for 3 years. I just felt the call to really find my own expression of East Asian medicine. I sold my shares, I sold my condo, I stuck everything in storage and went off on walkabout. And I thought it was going to be 3 months, turned out to be 13. And in that time, I had a chance to study with Shudo Sensei for the first time. That was when he came to Seattle. And at that seminar, he introduced us to Junji Mizutani, Jeffrey Dann. He allowed them to teach for 2 hours each what they were working on. In Jeffrey's case, the Koshi balancing. In Junji's case, this novel use of the bamboo tube in his moxa style. And I met Peter Thompson. I went back to Connecticut. He was booked out 2 months into the future, but I mentioned Stephen Brown's name. And he said, okay, I'll give up my lunch. You can come on such and such a day. It was 2 weeks out. And I grew up in the Northeast, so I had family I could stay with. And I went there, and he's living on this one lane road out in the middle of the boonies. And there's no development around, no nearby malls or anything like that. And I think, how do people even find him? There were no apps for finding people then. I had written instructions with 20 turns on it to get to his place. How does he stay booked out for 2 months into the future when he's out here in the middle of nowhere? And then the treatment, he just had me, here's the intake. I stood in front of him with my underwear on, and he just looked at my feet, my ankles, my knees. He just went up the body, making notes on this crazy little charting system he has, and then told me to get up on the table. And then he just danced his way through my body. It was the most just unbelievable experience for me. At the end, I didn't know which end was up, and I got off the table, and I had to stop myself from crying. My back, I had this low back pain for a long time. I had just come off 5 years of chronic Lyme disease and 3.5 years at that point. And I just said, I've got to learn what this guy's. This is just unbelievable. I want to be able to do this for people. And it turned out that was October. And that was the first article I wrote for the North American Journal, by the way. It was describing that visit to Peter Thompson's clinic. And he's still practicing, by the way. And I came back in January, I think it was, to Boston. He taught a weekend class at the Charles River School of Shiatsu. And by nature, a pretty good student, but I had an experience in his class I've never had anywhere else before or since. I didn't miss anything. It was like I was a sponge. Everything he said just went right in and found a home. And I left feeling like I think I can make a good start of duplicating this style. And that's what I came back to Portland eventually. And that's what I did. And I started doing things the way Peter did them. And I would go back to Connecticut every summer for a day, spend it at his clinic with him, treat his wife, Akiko, and treat him, and get feedback next year again. And that's how I made the progress in the regular Dr. Hashimoto's version of Sotai. Well, actually, I should qualify that. Peter said it's natural. You eventually find your own way. You have your own experiences you have to pay attention to. He said, strictly speaking, I don't do it exactly the way Hashimoto taught me. Right? He studied with him directly, but also with one of his lieutenants. I think his name maybe was Mr. Yoshino. I might have that wrong, but I think that's right. And but then back in Portland, I was being exposed to Feldenkrais. I had the seminar hosting company here, hosting Japanese medicine stuff, and we snuck in Russell Delman a number of times, who combines Zen, that's the Japanese piece, with Feldenkrais work. And I studied more with him outside of hosting him here. And of course, watched a lot of videos and studied also when Anat Baniel came to town here. She started her own work, but it's clearly strongly influenced by her beginnings with Moshe Feldenkrais. And so these were slowly leading me in the direction of gentler and gentler expressions of Sotai. And I was studying Milton Traeger's work also. Dean Juhan came to Seattle. I think Dave Engstrom might have been instrumental in bringing him. He had studied with Dean before that, I'm sure of. But it could have been one of Dave's friends brought him. I just can't recall. But I had been studying with private tutors here in Portland, the Traeger work, for a few years at that point. This kind of harkens back, by the way, to our last topic when I was talking with you, the Chinese medicine dream work. Why was I doing Traeger? Because I had a dream, it was probably in 2000 or so, that told me, combine Shudo, meridian therapy, the ion pumping cords of Monica, Sotai, and Traeger. I didn't even know what Traeger was, but the dream was so clear that I had to go out and figure out what is this stuff. And that's still a part of my work. I don't have a certification as a Traeger practitioner, so I don't hang out a shingle like that. But Dean Juhan, who is the successor to Milton Traeger, he put the stamp of approval on my work. He saw me working on Dave, and I did a little with him. And he said that I wouldn't gain anything from doing at least the first level of Traeger training. He said, you already have a good sense of the work.
This episode is brought to you by Jane, the clinic management software that honestly just makes running a practice easier. Let's dive into something that's never easy, but sometimes necessary: raising your fees. It can feel awkward, right? But here's a tip that can really help. Consider offering flexibility to your patients as you introduce the change. When patients face new fees, it's natural for them to feel uncertain or concerned. That's where flexibility can really make a difference. Offering options like a phased increase, suggesting a payment plan, or even taking a moment to talk things through can help to ease the transition. These thoughtful gestures show your patients that you're listening and care about them, which strengthens the trust you've worked so hard to build. If you're looking for more ideas on how to navigate these kinds of changes, Head to frontdesk.jane.app and check out the article, How to Tell Clients You're Raising Your Fees. One last thing, if you're ready to give Jane a try, you can use the code CHIOLOGICAL for a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Well, and it sounds like the other thing that you've done, which I suspect all practitioners do over time, we take something that we're called to, that we're drawn to. We learn it. Sometimes we have to really bang our head against it to get it. Sometimes it comes in really easily, like you explained with Peter. But we get these influences, and then they start to, like in our own mind, in our own experience, we see how things connect or how they might connect.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I started on my own just playing with that. Let me back up and explain some basics of Sotai to discuss what is Yin Sotai versus Sotai. And if we have time, I'll mention also Sotai Intuitivo, which is the work of a friend in Japan, Hiro Komatsu, also brilliant. His English is probably up to it. You could add him to your list of people to interview if you could arrange that.
You're a bit of a troublemaker. You said, why don't you do a month of body work? And at the moment, we could easily do 2. This is the first of the series.
I think Pacific College in San Diego is the only school that's ever had Thai massage as a class taught in a Chinese medicine program. So that'd probably be the ones to talk to there. I think Rick Gold, who has a good book out. So if you want to bring Thai massage in, I suspect that would be the right way to go. But you could also, I could put you in touch here in Portland with Dr. Paul Greenbaum, who's a real scholar of it, gone there every year for probably the last 25 years studying, and his wife is Thai. He really knows what he's talking about. Anyway, in Sotai, I defined it as an indirect method. First, the word Sotai, as Stephen Brown describes it. After World War II, this popular exercise system in Japan called Tai So, right? The syllables reversed. And it's characterized by sort of a militaristic, rigid posture, kind of calisthenics, we might say. And Hashimoto saw that popular system and he thought, no, that kind of rigid bearing, that's the opposite of health. Those are the trees that get blown over in a strong wind. We want to be like the bamboo.
Mm-hmm.
So to communicate that he wanted the exact opposite of Tai So, he called his work So Tai. Clever, very clever.
It is clever, yeah.
But I have had a Japanese patient, in my age category, who, when I start to explain what I want to do with them, they say, "Oh, so," because they remember Dr. Hashimoto for a few years had his own television program in Japan where he was teaching people how to help one another at home, mothers working on kids or vice versa. And so they recognize and they know how to work with me. So it's an indirect method. Hashimoto was asked in the most succinct way to define Sotai. He said it's a gentle medicine. So we're moving in the direction of ease. So say you have an elbow problem, pain. You would flex and extend to determine which one is a more easeful or comfortable movement. And that's the one we're going to use, right? We don't use the one that elicits pain. We move in the direction of ease while exhaling, and the practitioner will control when you inhale, when you exhale, when you move. And so you're moving together with the exhale. And at some point in that available range of motion, the practitioner is going to offer resistance, and not some, so that you get slowed down. It's 100%. It's a no resistance, none. Then you're totally stopped. But the patient has been coached ahead of time to know that when you encounter my resistance, keep trying to move. Keep the effort low, comfortable. We don't want to wrestle one another. And I'm going to hold that resistance for 3, 4, 5 seconds. For Peter, by the way, it's actually more like 2. But in Hashimoto's book, he says 3 to 5. And Stephen, by the way, Brown was the translator of Hashimoto's book. And he also studied just that one day with Hashimoto when he met him and received a treatment from him. So those are the two people here in the US who can speak really authoritatively of what was a treatment from Hashimoto like. And so then once the command to stop the effort is given, then the rest of the range of motion is completed passively, right? The practitioner's got maybe the hand at forearm is resisting this, say, this extension movement of the elbow. And once you give the command to relax after 3 seconds, and then when they really have relaxed you, the muscles have relaxed, you passively have completed. Well, that sounds way too simple to be of use in medicine. That was my first response. Sorry, very nice principle to move in a direction of ease, but how's this going to help a frozen shoulder? How's it going to help a tennis elbow, bum knee? And I have taught crowds and exercise physiologists, and they felt like they could understand what was going on. By the way, they loved Sotai right from the start, and they saw where it would be an important part of their practice. They said, we have patients, we don't know what to do with them. They have real pain, it's significant, we haven't been able to budget. But now I see I can do a Sotai routine with them. And so they felt like they could explain it, but it's complicated, this whole idea of eccentric flexing of muscles and so on. I don't understand that sort of thing, but they had a good explanation of it. And I just followed the simple Sotai way. Jeffrey Dann, you've interviewed him, and he's a good anatomist as well as a hell of a practitioner and theorist. And he could come up with a good explanation in the anatomy how Sotai works. The way my mind works, I don't need that explanation. I just, it was like that with Milton Traeger, by the way. He became a doctor when he was about 50 years of age. He had been doing his work since his teens. And people asked him, now that you know the anatomy and physiology, how has it changed your body work? He said, not one bit. It was always about the feel.
Mm.
He said, I know the muscle insertions now, but that doesn't do anything for me. I'm not saying we shouldn't learn anatomy and physiology, but I'm saying it is possible to practice at least certain styles by feel. That's been my interest in Sotai. And so those are the basics. We testing, right? This mobility test, mobility test called doshin. And then this idea of moving with the exhale. And at some point, there's going to be resistance from the practitioner for, say, 3 seconds. And then the command to relax is given. And when the muscles really relax, then we passively complete the range of motion. So that's really what I was working with. But Peter put a real finesse to it. And he had a whole kata that he would go through with the patient, and starting at the feet, moving up the supine body. And he didn't have enough time to do a lot of prone Sotai in his regular kata, a few moves, but often when you were face down with him is when he would do the needles, just for 5 minutes, 7 minutes. And he uses like a micro stim on the needles as well. And occasionally a little bit of moxa. And he includes a little bit of body work. When you study acupuncture in Japan, you do study Shiatsu as well. So he uses some of that in his treatments.
So it's just called the regular Sotai. You're already talking about very yin processes. We're moving in the direction of ease.
Right.
We're not trying to muscle anything. I mean, there's that moment of resistance and you're staying with it, but then there's completion of the movement without any effort. Already that sounds very yin.
Yeah. Sotai, regular Hashimoto Sotai is yin laid up against most styles of body work. Now, some people, when you ask them to move, they're going to make a very yang-ish movement. We counsel them. It works a little bit better if it's gentle. But some people, they're very yang in their nature. But the movements in Sotai done with strength, they're still very, very helpful, right? You have kind of an whole body isometric contraction when you're doing things that way, and then a sudden release of that. And so that's what a more yang style of Sotai looks like. And particular Sotai movements seem to work a little bit better if they're a little bit heading in the yang direction, and others more in the yin direction. That all comes with time and experience. So, yeah, how did I end up moving yin, yin, yin? Well, I mentioned Russell Delman and Feldenkrais and Anat Baniel and her neuro movement, she calls her system, and the Traeger bodywork, but also someone else I hope you'll be interviewing, Stephen Schleifer with the Qigong Tuina. This is nothing like Tuina. It really should change its name to yin yang channel pulsing or something like that. It's extraordinarily subtle. And I started to study with him. That's probably 10 years now and I still study with him. So it's all pushing me in the direction of yin, 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 yin. And all the while still having this background of having yang needling and yang body work and appreciating it. I still would love Thai massage if I had a chance to have it regularly. It's a great system. But I was moving in this yin direction. And then there's another idea in Sotai called a pattern of distortion, Hizumi no Hase. And what this says is, say, Michael, you have plantar fasciitis just in your right foot. You're going to walk in such a way as to favor that, right? You come with all your weight down on the part that hurts. Over time, that's going to lead to an overuse of your left side. And the pattern of distortion says is where it's most likely to show up is sort of 1 unit higher, so the left ankle. And conversely, if the left ankle were the original problem and not the right foot, and you would walk in a way favoring that left ankle, the pattern of distortion concept says, well, it's going to cross the other side up a level. You're going to get possibly a right knee problem. And the right knee might lead to a left hip problem. And, we have these zigzagging lines, the way it's drawn out in 2 dimensions. In reality, these are spiral lines of influence, right? So it's this concept of zigzagging areas of stuckness up the structure, right? The myofascial and bony structure. Well, I thought about that idea of a pattern of distortion, and I thought about a key phrase I had learned from Russell Delman when he was treating someone with SI joint problem, and they were on their back, so they're supine. He was standing and he touched both ASIS. It was so exquisitely light. And he said, my hands are here and they're just a little bit more than gravity. Sometimes a phrase like that can change your life.
A little bit more than gravity. Oh, yeah, no, thank you. I'm curious about that.
So maybe 8 years ago, also, Dan Bensky and his way with the engaging vitality that he and Marguerite and Chip put together, I hosted them and got a chance to study. So this idea of listening at listening posts, right? Bilaterally, listening at the ankles, the knees, ASIS, ribs, and so on. That became a key idea for me in forming the Yin Sotai. Now, they're truly just touching and listening for what an engaging vitality would call the yang rhythm, but another style would call it the craniorhythmic impulse, right? And you're assessing left and right amplitude differences. I thought, what if I touch with a little bit more than that? And I'm looking for Sotai actionable information, not information about the state of the yang qi in the body. And so I would touch on the top of the feet, right? We're imagining a patient on the table, on her back, and I just touch on the foot a little bit more than gravity. You see one of them has a little bit more ability to move into plantar flexion when compared to the other. That's all the information I need. to construct a Yin Sotai move. Because in Yin Sotai, both sides have a movement, always. I don't work on one shoulder. I'll give one shoulder a movement and another movement to the other shoulder or to the ribs or to the ASIS on the other side of the body. Now, there's a reason in normal Sotai thinking for that. That is that, and this ties into Jeffrey Dann's work with the Koshi balancing. This Koshi as the greater lumbopelvic center, right? Koshi is the yang to the hara, it being the yin. And it is a Sotai principle that with every movement, even in the wrist, we're supposed to have Koshi engaged. Well, most people don't do that, though. If they're doing a Sotai in the wrist, they don't engage Koshi because it's easy to leave Koshi out, right? It's kind of artificial for most people's movement patterns to involve it in any significant way. But if you are moving right shoulder and the left knee or the left ASIS, it's impossible to leave Koshi out of the equation. Koshi has to be engaged. If I'm doing one ankle and the other ankle, it's impossible to leave Koshi out. So I was designing a system because I studied with Jeffrey starting in 2004. He has been a big influence and a dear mentor to me. This is really, Yin Sotai is a way for me to honor importance I learned from him to give to Koshi, because I wanted a system that demanded of the patient's body that Koshi always get activated with every movement. So that's there in the Yin Sotai. And I dialed the amount of patient effort way back, almost homeopathic, if they will do that with me. It's difficult for some patients to dial their movement down to such a minimalistic efforting. But that's the goal. We want to train them to get there, because it's an odd thing that you get from the studying Feldenkrais stuff. He cites a law that's I'm not going to come up with it off the top of my head, in the nervous system, that if you want to make nervous system change, right, we can make muscle change with strong pressure, and that's what we did in Thai massage. But if you want to make neurological change, you want gentler and gentler effort, and you want awareness. That's the key thing from Anat Baniel and her work. Movement with awareness holds the possibility of neurological change. If you're just moving without awareness, you're just reinforcing a habit. And if you're moving strongly, you're doing a movement you already know how to do. There's no novelty. But if you imagine I'm working with you now, Michael, and you've got tennis elbow on the right. You've flexed your arm. Say we do the mobility test and flexing is more comfortable than extending. So you're going to, with the exhale, flex. I want you to imagine that you've never made that movement ever before. That kind of curiosity and novelty brought to the movement. In that, there is the hope of neurological change. And that's what Milton Traeger was after. He's very explicit. And that's what Hashimoto was after. I think they would have loved one another. And of course, Traeger and Feldenkrais, they did love one another. They met at Esalen. And immediately, well, they had the Jewish background to tie them together as well. But, Feldenkrais received a treatment from Traeger and spoke very highly of it. He said, "You've given me new knees. I wished I had met you years before."
Having a thriving, profitable practice is one of the most healing things you can do as a healthcare practitioner, because a robust business is the ultimate expression of vital chi, and that's the heart of our medicine. I'm Julie Bairdontlock, and I help practitioners grow nourishing, profitable, authentic businesses that embody the generative cycle of Chinese medicine. This isn't about all yang all the time. It's about expanding your own internal capacity, growing collaborative relationships with your patients for ethical patient retention, and marketing as an extension of this medicine, not a necessary evil. You already know that everything is connected in your patients' lives and bodies. The same is true for your business. When we align your systems, your schedule, your pricing, and your offerings with you, we create flow, which means more spaciousness, more impact, and more joy. When you are in the flow, fully resourced in terms of chi, time, and money, your business becomes a source of healing, not just for your patients, but for you. Let's grow something rooted, radiant, and real. Visit lifeflowconsulting.com to learn more.
I'm thinking of something. I just want to put an underscore on doing a movement like you've never done it, or investigating it in a way that brings the novelty of the experience of being embodied and what's happening with your body. I often hear patients, when something changes, they will often minimize it. And the way they minimize it is they say, oh, it's just a baby step. And I've found myself over the years saying a baby step is not small to a baby. It's world changing. It's a big, big deal to a baby. Thank you for that phrase about a little more than the sense of gravity, but also this, that sense of engaging movement as if for the first time. Even the suggestion, as if for the first time, that already I find my entire nervous system being like, oh, that sounds exciting. I mean, most of us, if we're not terrified by it, love novelty, right? It can go both directions. It can be very frightening, or it could be like incredibly delicious.
Yeah, exactly. So, by the way, I think starting tomorrow for a week, a free documentary on Not Bunny L's work, if you just go to her website, her spelling ANAT, B as in baby, AN as in Nancy, IEL. You can just find her online, and I'm sure it's prominent on her website to get a free ticket to documentary. That woman is just brilliant in her work with special needs children or adults for that matter, and recovery from traumatic injury also. Her background's in psychology and dance, and so and she met Moshe Feldenkrais when she was 2 years old. Her father was a scientific colleague of his, so she's a great resource if you want something to jumble you're thinking in Chinese medicine, but a beautiful new influence. With her, I've got to mention Buckminster Fuller, where I've had two dreams in which I'm with a group of Chinese medicine students, and they don't know who Bucky Fuller
How could you not know Bucky Fuller?
And I'm crying because see how you're trying to impart to them what an extraordinary human figure he was. Well, we don't have to go into his whole biography. People can go to bfi.org, Buckminster Fuller Institute, to get that. There are many YouTube videos, but a key concept, because we're talking Yin Sotai, was his concept. He wrote this as one word: more with lessing. What a strange English word.
More with lessing. That sounds like Bucky. Bucky had a really playful, engaging way of using language.
Right. He said, rather be not understood than misunderstood. You have to think about that one. Anyway, what is more with lessing? That was his rationale for his creative use of language. More with lessing is the attempt to do ever more with ever less. Why use 20 needles when, like I think, Toyohari, which I've studied, gone through the basic training twice, this is classic more with lessing, right? One of the Japanese meridian therapy styles. Dann and Marguerite's engaging vitality is a more with lessing style. Absolutely, right? You could end up with very few needles expertly placed in that style. That's Bucky Fuller would put the stamp of approval on that. And he did, by the way, receive acupuncture in Japan whenever he was there. And Dan Kenner in his old website told the story of him coming to be treated by his sensei, Dr. Mie. So we want to do ever more with ever less. Who could argue with that? We're in an era of resource shortages, Fuller was acutely aware of that. He paid for, in the early 60s, a complete inventory of the known resources of the earth, and had what he called the world game to try to intelligently allocate them. But in Yin Sotai, we're asking that question, right? What's the least amount effort I could ask the patient to give me? And all I have to do is meet. To resist a very light effort, I don't have to come in heavy handed. So I'm learning something all the while myself when I do Yin Sotai with a patient. I swear with every treatment, my skills get subtler and subtler.
Hmm.
It's like kind of a training ground. And that subtlety then influences my needling. It influences my ability to find good point locations and influences how I use the tation. So this is kind of movement towards the yin direction with Sotai has created a spillover effect into other aspects of my practice life. Very grateful. Grateful to Hashimoto for the original idea. Grateful to Stephen for that was his first book he translated, right? Grateful to him and that he transmits it, teaches it beautifully. Grateful to Peter and Akiko Thompson for practicing that here as their main way. Jeffrey includes Sotai in his Koshi balancing protocol. And many colleagues mentioned Hiro Komatsu, Randy Lucas, and Alaska, very good Sotai practitioner, Erlen Truitt down in New Mexico. The people all over the country, because really primarily because I think of Peter and Stephen and Jeffrey, that they, before I came along, they were getting the word out about Sotai. And I think there'll be some North American version. I suppose my Yin Sotai is a North American version of it. I try to stay true to Hashimoto's principles. For instance, there's Sotai now, modern day in Japan, they've abandoned the use of the breath. None of us here think that's a good idea. The first time I studied in Boston at the Charles River School of Shiatsu with Peter, the whole first morning, Saturday morning, he talked about the breath the entire time. And so he's not a fan of that abandoning the breath. I'm not, but I'm just saying it's already gone in a different direction in Japan. Not many people doing original Hashimoto style Sotai there. They've already improvised and other influences came in their lives. Now, the hero, he's got some great ideas. I hope you do bring him on for an interview. His work we call Sotai Intuitivo is quite different. I don't have the time now. I'm looking at the clock, and I would leave it to him to explain his own work anyway. But some of his ideas I brought into Yin Sotai. I can't remove the breath, though. He used very strong movements and a different way of testing for the movements. So I think that all useful ideas, and they can be yin-ized, just like I've yin-ized every other aspect of the Sotai.
The thing you just mentioned about the breath, well, it got my attention for a couple things. Number one, everything is always in motion and everything is always evolving. And so while something amazing could have come from Japan, they could also, through time, forget what they had. And likewise, the seeds of something foreign can land on a different soil, like here in the States, and catch root and flourish. We are in a time, I think, with East Asian medicine where people who learned it here or maybe had some influence from the East, but, we've primarily engaged our practices here, and our experience here and the people that we've met here have allowed us to create what is we do. And I remember years ago reading Steve Clavy's book on fluid physiology and pathology and thinking they should translate this into Chinese because they could use it over there. The other thing about breath that I just want to come back to, and I think this is important, Maybe because it's a central aspect of my practice, which is that throughout our work, whatever work it is that we're doing, it's important that we are engaged with our patients. I could talk for hours about ways of engaging with our patients because there's lots of different ways.
Right.
But the thing about the breath, I think it is the most primordial and quickest way to be connected to somebody else. When your breathing kind of synchronizes in some way, something is activated.
Long ago talk, well, two talks, one from Peter Yates, who passed away sadly a few years ago. One of the people who brought Japanese style acupuncture to the US, he was on Long Island, and Dan Bensky in a talk. They both said the first visit with a new patient, they teach breathing. Whoa, that's pretty fascinating. Now, we've mentioned earlier in our conversation Alice Wielden, the Seiki Soho, continuing the work of her teacher Kishi. In a Seiki treatment, you have a hawk's eye on the patient's breathing the entire time. You don't close your eyes, you don't space out. You're watching for change there. And so obviously the breath is very important. And I think, let me be fair to the people in Japan, why they abandoned the breath was not because of a lack of appreciation of the breath, is because they were doing things that were longer sequences. They couldn't be completed on one exhale. Some of the practitioners, looks like they're doing Feldenkrais functional integration more than Sotai. Of course, that's fine. I have the highest opinion about that. I want to be fair. It's not out of lack of appreciation of the importance of the breath that they abandon it in their own therapy. They couldn't do what they wanted to do on one exhale cycle.
That's helpful. But again, we're back to looking at evolutionary processes. Things change over time. Things slide out. Of course, there's usually a good reason.
By the way, jumping back to Bucky Fuller, one more of his life mission was to discover nature's organizing principles and turn them to the advantage of humankind. That should be understood as a Taoist mission, right? Understand nature's organizing principles. How is that not Taoist? And turn them to the advantage of all. That's like Bodhisattva. And he called precession. Well, this has a astronomical meaning, but he took it in a metaphorical sense. He said that the intended outcome of a given action is always going to be less than the impact of the unintended outcomes. So his example was a bee goes to a flower. What do they want? They want food for self and for hive. One hive. Propagating all the plants of the forest is far more significant as an impact than one hive staying alive. So you go to a store, I like this example, to buy whatever, carton of milk, orange juice, and mother in front of you has a child that's acting out terribly. And with your own child, maybe you would have been harsh with them, spoken to them harshly, maybe even spanked them. Who knows what you would have done. But you notice this mother so deftly and so lovingly deal with this acting out child and effectively. And you think, oh my God, I have been parenting in such caveman way. Who do I know? Cavemen raised their kids, but let's just say, a brutal way. You went there to get a carton of milk and you leave with a different parenting idea. What's going to be the greater impact in your life, not just your life, but your child's life and their kids, right? And their kids' kids. And so he says, we live in a precessional universe and we don't even know it. This precession happens every time something happens. And so I developed Yin Sotai just out of my own intellectual curiosity. I didn't know if it was going to work. And I'm not saying it's better than regular Sotai, but I've gotten feedback from students, because I've taught this here in Portland and elsewhere for years now. By the way, there are YouTube videos of this, so that will be helpful for the listeners. Go to YouTube, just put Bob Quinn, Blue Poppy, Yin Sotai. You'll get there because they're hosted on the Blue Poppy YouTube channel. And when I developed it, it was for me and my practice. I didn't think I'd ever teach it. I thought teaching was for Stephen Brown, Peter Thompson, Jeffrey Dann. They're my seniors, they're my teachers, not my business to be out there promoting something novel. But sharing it at NUNM and at OCOM, this word gets out, and then the Oregon Acupuncture Association asks to teach this, and it's happened many times like that, and I've taught it now in other doctoral programs, and get the feedback like that it revolutionized their practice and their way of thinking.
Yes, and it came because you followed something that had your attention.
Yeah, and it's pre-session. My intention was not to develop something to teach, a novel new thing that could go out there. It was for me to develop a way to bring in this influence from Russell Delman and Not Baniel, Milton Traeger, and all these other influences, Alice, Dan Bensky, just to funnel it into something that uniquely kind of came from my cabeza. But this is pre-session. That's what Bucky Fuller is saying. The outcome is bigger because it went out into the world. And this would be the case with any of the novel styles that have been developed. So that's interesting to me, that this is one of the key principles that Bucky Fuller saw in nature, this pre-session, this more with lessing. There are others. I encourage people to study his work. You need 10 lifetimes to really dive in, but you should start. It's just such beautiful stuff. And he was kind of a technological bodhisattva. He made millions of dollars, all got poured into the next project. He died without an estate, no money left. Yeah, they had to raise money to have a Buckminster Fuller Institute. It was always thinking about the whole. That's another principle. Commence always with your attention to the whole. We were talking about the breath. The whole can be seen to be embodied in the style of breathing that the patient utilizes.
Well, and I'm struck here too, thinking about Yin Sotai and whatever work you're doing with it, it's also connected to the Koshi.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, both there are CE classes on Blue Poppy for Yin Sotai and Koshi balancing. The free stuff I mentioned on the YouTube, it's really enough to get you. Of course, watching a whole DVD for 2 hours or the whole CE course might be better. There's sufficient material on YouTube that's absolutely for free on the Blue Poppy channel that you can get going. Say you've had no Sotai exposure, no Yin Sotai exposure. I think that's enough if you're comfortable already working with bodies.
It can get you started. I'll make sure links are on the show notes page, and generous of you to have that up there, and even more so taking this time to sit down today for this discussion, because what I'm hearing is there is a curiosity and a sort of thirst, sense of inquiry that you've had throughout your career.
Yeah, I'm a born eclectic soul.
Yeah, and it's led you to this. I think that's an important thing for people to recognize if they want to take a look into it. It's knowing a little bit about the mind and the heart of the person who first noticed it.
I'll tell you something. I used to be so smart. I had a full scholarship at college. I was a smart guy. Chronic Lyme disease ruined that. They're permanent neurological deficits. I'm not 1/10 the smartness in the school academic work that I used to be. That's a blessing. It put me into my hands. I can't do complicated stuff. I can't practice a complicated style. It has to be really on the level of following my touch in a very real way, it was a great blessing to have that kind of intelligence. I studied math and I studied logic. I was a very smart guy. And now just my approach to, I'm embarrassed to have people watch me practice because they say, why did you do that? I felt, I was feeling, and there's something here that is unhealthy. It's a shiatsu, or in Japanese, say jaki. I'm just feeling for otherness. And when I asked Dr. Bear, Iwashina sensei, why he's picking given points in the abdomen, he does a little tapping technique with kind of a thicker tool like an enshin and little mallet. And he said, I just feel for otherness. He said, it could be otherness in the skin, could be energetic otherness, could be the muscle beneath the skin. I feel a little tension, any kind of otherness, it's going to get some tapping. That gives me license to start exploring this idea of scanning the abdomen. Where is the otherness? What is the character of this otherness? But give some treatment. Might not be local. I might find a distal area to treat to bring change, but trying to make things a little bit easier.
This is such a wonderful part, I think, of the medicine that we practice, that our influences, and especially deep influences, they sometimes can come with a simple phrase, or all of a sudden you look and you see things differently, or you put your hands on and you notice something that you did not notice before, and it's undeniable.
Right.
And here you are with the strange blessing of Lyme disease, which took you out of your thinking mind and put you into your hands. So good, bad, often hard to make some distinctions here with that kind of thing.
So when I write something, say for the North American Journal, which I do frequently, they're always just little clinical tip kind of thing. I can't write the way that Chip and Dann and Heiner Fruhop, that these people, I literally don't have the basic capacity to do anything like that. Whereas before, I was quite capable of that kind of thing. So it's a true blessing for me, and by extension, my patients, that this is the way I'm supposed to work, through my hands. It was, like I said, 1983, bought a massage table and just wanted hands-on people.
Well, my friend, well played.
Yeah, I intend to keep at it as long as I can. When I first went to Japan with Jeffrey and Stephen, there was this one meridian therapist. He was almost 90. He was still practicing, got to watch him. That's it. And of course, the Shudo sensei himself, well into his 80s. I don't know. Maybe he's over 85 now, I'm guessing. And still practicing. That's my model. There's no sense to invest all the time I invested in this. And my attitude was always, I want to, because Bucky Fuller is my number one sensei. And I want to help other human beings. And so I intend to keep at it as long as I possibly can, physically.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for the time today. It's always a delight to hang out with you, and I have some new things to chew on. I'm looking forward to walking into clinic tomorrow.
Yeah, well, watch the YouTube videos. I think they're only, the longest one's 20 minutes, and you might get some ideas there.
I think I will.
Well, it's great to see you, Michael.
Take good care. Buckminster Fuller, I'd not thought about Bucky for a long, long time. I remember him as an odd cultural relic from the late 60s and early 70s. Here's this clean-cut engineering type guy with nerdy glasses, and that's before it was fashionable. He's writing books with titles like I Seem to Be a Verb, and he's designing and building geodesic domes. He's talking about whole systems and how humans are part of nature, but at the same time, he's not some kind of back to the land nature guy. He's an engineer. That idea that Bob shared, that we can head out to buy a carton of milk and come home with a whole new idea about raising children. How we start off to do something mundane and mindless, but if we are paying attention, our entire world can suddenly spin on a new pivot. That is something worth leaving a little room for in our day-to-day lives, and it also can happen in our treatment rooms. Well, here we are at the end of this episode. If you've listened up to this point, you're either a rabid fan of Qiological or the forward button on your podcast player stopped working. If you are indeed a fan of the podcast, you can help us to bring new episodes to our community of practitioners by supporting us with a membership or a one-time contribution. Details, of course, are on the website. That's it for today, friends. Join us again next Tuesday for another thoughtful episode of Qiological.